related information as part of this discussion, presentation. But there are really interesting Gallup and Harris poll surveys that look at who do you trust and who do you have high ethical expectations for. And they tend to be at the top of the list. The public has high ethical expectations for law enforcement, school teachers, judges. It's folks who work like us in the public sector. And you know what's down at the bottom? The folks who work in private business. Citizens have very low expectations for the ethics and honesty for people who are in sales, marketing, big business, big pharma, okay? Those folks are at the bottom, although we're always told to be more like them. It's kind of an interesting rub. More like, well, you want us to, even when you look at how people's expectations for civil servant, it's like perfectly average, but very high expectation, especially for law enforcement. It's at the top of the list. It beats just about everything. It beats college professors. It's a very high expectation. I think even in this, you're right, in this environment, even more high these days. So we've got duties and obligations. Another lens through which to look at an ethical problem is to think about what principles apply. These are basically things that we learn, and I'll talk more about these in just a little bit. So you look at what ethical duties come with my role in the organization as a public servant, what external sources of moral guidance are available to me. Number 3, virtues. Have you ever heard of character ethics? Character? These are internal sources of moral guidance. Okay? These aren't things you learn. These are things that come with you. They're inherent in your being. And then finally, benefits to society. Another way in the philosophical literature to study and to make ethical decisions is to actually look at the outcomes. What are the consequences? What happens if I make this decision? Will it provide, will it be in the greater good? Okay. And we'll spend a little bit more time talking about each of these in a little bit. They're embedded in our decision-making tool that we're going to develop. So that's a really big definition. It has a lot of important elements to it. Does anyone have any comments or questions about our definition? This is the bottom line. Ethics requires individuals to take an active role. This definition requires us to take an active role in ethical reasoning, navigating through the sometimes conflicting obligations, principles, and virtues surrounding an ethical decision. Most ethicists agree that you just can't sit back and wait for someone to fill you up with ethical knowledge and tell you what's the right thing to do. You have to be proactive, okay, using your reasoning abilities, okay, and all the materials that you have available to you to make good ethical decisions. So that's really important. It requires action on our part, not just sitting back and waiting for someone to tell us what to do. All right, so we said that ethics operates at different levels. I'm going to begin with a macro discussion of ethics, and then slowly narrow down to individual ethics. Okay? And let's begin with this idea of social ethics. These are ethics that oblige members of a given society to act in ways that both protect individuals and further the progress of the group as a whole. Okay? These are ethics that are held by a community, a large social organization. These are ethics that maybe a civilization may have, a country, a state, a tribe. And they may be formal, and they may be informal. You gave me a great example of formal societal ethics before. Don't we have laws against homicide? Right? And we treat that as the most heinous act against society. It's not an act against an individual, it's an act against the state of North Carolina. That's the nomenclature that's used. It's Brunei v. or the state of North Carolina versus Brunei. It's the people, it's the society, the state that's bringing action against that individual. And we sanction that crime severely, and stealing as well. Okay? That's how we formalize societal ethics. We create laws. And there are other formal things we can create. Within a context, we can have rules and things like that. But they're formal. Do you think that there could be informal societal ethics? Maybe things that bind us together as a people, but we don't necessarily need to have a law telling us it to be so? Are there certain principles or values that define us as North Carolinians or Americans or members of the Western world?
Well, I thought we had those before they passed the law.
Oh, before we pass the law? Okay.
And I was under the assumption we had them anyway.
Okay. Well, what are some of the ideas are you thinking of?
Well, not to take Jefferson, et cetera. I mean, everything they passed the law for, I mean, we had to pass the law for.
Okay. Yeah, and usually the formalization comes about, sociologists would tell us, after we've had problems with folks breaking those informal rules, those informal understandings that we have. And as things tend to get larger and those social connections tend to break down and get stretched out, we become more formalized and we put things into the statute, we make rules on them, we pass, in law enforcement we call them general orders, but you may have a policies and procedures manual. All of a sudden those start coming down the pipe. You open up the binder, you stick the new one in, you take the old one out, right? I'm even thinking about bigger. We as Americans, are there certain values or principles that hold us together as a people?
I think the preamble to the Constitution has, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal,
Right.
they can pursue life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Sure.
Those things, I think, define the American people in a general way, in an ethical way.
And do you think those concepts still apply today?
Sure.
Yeah. Right? I mean, these are things that most of us would agree are self-evident truths. Even though people can't, like you can recite these things, parkour, okay? Instead, we've got, democracy is a good thing. Liberty, freedom, would you agree? These are things, even though we can't say what's the source of, most people can't, right, unfortunately. Can't cite the source for a lot of these concepts, but they believe them to be true and righteous. Okay. There's an example of societal ethics I'd like to just share with you. Informal societal ethics from the Second World War. In many cases, when Nazi Germany overran a country in Central and Western Europe, the countries, the civil infrastructure generally capitulated and maybe didn't actively work hand in hand with the Nazis, but wasn't putting up much of a fight. So the governmental structures, the elements of civil society were pretty much in place in most countries after the Nazis took over. Okay? Think of Vichy France, for example. Okay? There was one notable exception to this, and it's Denmark in the Second World War. They were invaded in 1940. Okay? And let me just share you an example of informal social ethics, societal ethics, in Denmark during the Second World War.